good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are. So we'll jump straight in and let our guest today, tell us something about where they are right now and introduce themselves. Cecily?
Thank you. Well, it is good evening because where I'm sitting is on the other side of the world, I think, to you, really. I'm Cecily Maller, and I'm coming to you from Wurundjeri land in Melbourne, Australia, which is part of the Kulin Nation. And they've been here for tens of thousands of years. But because you're on a boat, you might prefer to dock in the port of Melbourne, where our port is, which is, I think, the scene behind me. I actually hastily sourced this image, but it looks like Melbourne to me.
Cool. Great. Could you tell us what it is that you do?
So I'm a professor in the Centre for Urban Research at RMIT University in Melbourne. I do some research, leadership, and sometimes do postgraduate teaching.
Excellent. I'll pass over to our resident pirate, Natalia.
Thank you. Cecily, when did you first encounter practice theory?
Well, it was a little while ago. So there's a little bit of a story here. I first heard of practice theory, I think, in about 2006, before I really understood the significance of it, actually. So I was working in Canberra for the Australian government after finishing my PhD. And a colleague there suggested that I might like practice theory because she'd found it really useful in her PhD research, which was on the receptivity of water recycling and why, just trying to explain to the public why it was important and why they should get on board with it wasn't actually a very useful approach. I can't remember what I was working on exactly at the time when she suggested it to me, but it was either the animal welfare strategy, which was kind of a national strategy in Australia that was being updated, that I guess was about how farmers were looking after their animals or not, or else it was a biosecurity project that was looking at peri-urban farming practices and whether these kind of urbanites that move to the fringes of rural areas know what they're doing when it comes to farming. But it wasn't until I actually started working at RMIT in 2008 that I really encountered practice theory properly. And that was because colleagues there were using it already, and they were using it to study, and I was too, to study sustainability as a kind of a counter approach to behaviour change. And it was, in fact, reading a book by Elizabeth Shove called Comfort, Cleanliness and Convenience that really introduced me to the theory. And then Elizabeth actually came out and visited us that same year in 2008. And so I was able to, go to seminars that she gave and talk to her in person about it.
So that was 2008, and since then you're still using practice theory. So what attracts you to this theoretical framework?
I keep using it. I guess I've sort of, it's always been there since I encountered it at that time, although I have kind of also become interested in other theories, but somehow practice theory is always there in the mix. And the two main things I think that attracted me then still hold true now. And the first one really, that it doesn't focus on individuals, but also on things and materiality and technologies, and all the interdependencies or interrelatedness really. And coming from a background where I studied ecology and environmental studies, this made sense to me in a lot of different ways. And the second thing is, I think, in how it accounts for change or the dynamics of the relationships at play, and that sort of that idea that things are constantly on the move and what this can actually mean for policy interventions, among other things, really, even in terms of understanding effects in the world and that kind of thing. I'd done my PhD in a public health context. It wasn't a pure public health PhD, but it was definitely in a school where that was a focus. And I'd become increasingly uncomfortable with, these simplistic kind of linear models of change, and also the really strong emphasis on individuals and individuals as responsible for their own health states and for changing them and improving them. I also found that, the bit of public health I was in at that time was actually quite atheoretical, and yeah, so finding, you know, social theory in general was a bit of a revelation for me.
And currently, what practice theoretical ideas do you find especially useful in your work and or exciting to work with?
It's hard to sort of pin it down exactly. I suppose what I'm interested in is using theories of practice in ways that are kind of interesting to me or on topics that I find interesting. So I guess at the moment I'm working conceptually with practices to understand human microbial relations in the context of health and ill health, and how practices of everyday life, including professional practices, bring us into contact with millions of things, of entities that we cannot really see or cannot really know, but they have profound implications for health. And as part of that, I have an interest in ventilation practices and how they change the microbial composition of indoor environments. So I've been thinking about that problem in terms of the air and indoor environments using theories of practice, but that's a bit developmental at this point. But my interest really has come from a long-standing interest in the health benefits of contact with nature. And I feel like thinking about microbes is a different kind of nature than the kind we normally think of, which is usually bigger things like plants and animals, or, you know, oceans and things like that. So that's kind of, yeah, where a lot of my thinking and interest is at the moment, is thinking about microbes and their presence, role in accounting for in theories of practice. I'm also thinking a little bit more about how human bodies are conceptualized in theories of practice, and using this to think about, if there are any, but kind of where the humanist and post-humanist edges, yeah, if there are any, of the theory might be. I'm returning to some earlier work that I wrote about bodies, almost going back 10 years now, I think. And I guess thinking about how, you know, what's been developed in terms of the theory since that time, and how it's been used in all sorts of different contexts, and whether I still agree with those ideas that I had originally, or not.
Thank you so much. Now over to Elizabeth, our resident anthropologist, who will for sure have some follow-up questions about microbes and tribes and souvenirs.
Well, tribes is my official topic, but actually I want to cheat a bit. I often do this, and go back. You've mentioned several times using practice theory.
Mm-hmm.
You use it for this and use it for that. I'd like to know more about how you think of theory, and is it something that you use, or what do you mean by using practice theory?
That's a good question. I think when I say use it, I mean that in several different ways. And the first one is to kind of think with. Mm-hmm. So to think through problems or topics that might be of interest. And then also in terms of, you know, actually writing with it to create a piece. Usually the way we communicate as academics and as scholars is through, you know, writing. So I use it in that way in my writing. Like, I feel like as much as it plays a part in, you know, ontology and how I see the world, I almost feel like I have to invoke it and use it, which is probably why I use that term.
Mm-hmm. So it's somehow, it sounds like it's a not a fixed thing, but an identifiable thing that you can point to. Is that how you see it? Are you adding to it as well?
I'd like to think that I'm trying to add to it. To be honest, I felt like, because I, you know, thinking about time and the time I was deeply immersed in the theory, was when I had roles that were much more research focused. And so over the last 5 years, I haven't really had that as much. So in some ways, I've felt like I've become a bit more distant from theory and thinking with that, and actually doing scholarship. I don't mean this as an excuse at all, but it's sort of, and again, I'd started thinking about other theories or working with other theories that I was interested in. That was through a book project. So, you know, I read about new materialism and, you know, affect and non-representational theory, and also practice theory. And then sort of was encompassing all of that in this idea of the more than human. So I got a bit distracted for a while, I suppose. And then I've actually found myself coming back to theories of practice because I feel that they are more tangible in some way. I think there's a more extensive body of work, and that they've been used in, or, you know, been brought into projects and thinking in quite a comprehensive way, actually, and in quite a diverse way compared to perhaps some other theories where people kind of, you know, apply them or work with them in fairly similar ways. And so there's a very coherent body of work, whereas if you look at literature, you know, that purports to engage with theories of practice, it's incredibly diverse.
And that's also great. So practice theory is valuable because it's incoherent, basically.
And also I think it's very dynamic. You know, it's there's always something that seems to be new and fresh about it, I think, because people are still, you know, working with it and using it.
Making things up.
That's right.
Right, now I'm going to properly wear my hat and be an anthropologist, and I can see you're you know, you're in the harbour. But are you on your own there, or do you feel part of a tribe or a group, either in Melbourne or globally, or who do you hang out with practice theory wise?
Well, I definitely would say I feel part of a global group, tribe, community maybe is a nice word, and that's quite diffuse. It's perhaps not quite as intense as it was a few years ago. But at RMIT, we had a really active group of researchers and students who were all working with theories of practice that went on for about 5 years, that I led with Yolandi Strengers. And there are still quite a few of those people around, and we are still collaborating, probably in a much less intense way than we were a few years ago. But there are some very dedicated people who you know, came across or were introduced to theories of practice through Yolandi and I, and are still very much enamoured of them. And they've actually kept our social practice theory reading group going, which was started in 2012. So that's nearly 15 years later. And I know that there are some people around Australia and sometimes internationally who dial into that as well. So I definitely don't feel like I'm on my own.
That's great. That's great. So we're coming to an end of our little trip to Melbourne, but we'd like a souvenir so that we can have fond memories of this experience. Have you got anything to give us?
I do have something, and it has a little story, a little bit of explanation, so I hope you'll bear with me. But I'd actually like to give you a bug, but more specifically, I'd like to give you a good bug, and that bug is a bacteriophage. And they're a type of virus, actually known as phages more commonly, that only infect bacteria. And they usually only target one type of bacteria. And they were first used as a treatment for infections ages ago, like I think more than a century ago. But the rise of antibiotics and, you know, the fact that they're not always working now in treating infections. The rise of antibiotics actually meant that we stopped being interested in phages as a potential way of treating infections. But antibiotic resistance has all of a sudden renewed this interest in phages because superbugs are a very serious problem. And I've read some predictions that, you know, in just a couple of decades, they could be killing millions and millions of people every year. And there's one superbug called Klebsiella. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but that's how I've read it. That's increasingly resistant to being treated with antibiotics. It can cause pneumonia, wound infections that are very difficult to heal or sometimes don't heal, meningitis. There's some very serious life-threatening sort of health states that it can cause or induce in people. And then a team from Monash University, their biomedicine discovery unit, decided to go and look for some phages that they might be able to use to treat this particular infection. And they thought, well, rather than looking in hospitals, we'll go and look in the waterways in Melbourne. And they actually worked with traditional owners, the Wurundjeri Wurrung people, who decided to put forward the Merry Creek. And that is a creek that runs through Melbourne's northern suburbs. It's about 70 kilometres long. So they took samples of Klebsiella from actual patients in the Alfred Hospital, and they used them as a bait in the river water, hoping that they might attract some phages that would then attack them. And to their surprise, it actually worked. And some phages came and attacked this bacteria. And they took it back to the lab, and they actually found it quite successfully kills Klebsiella. So it's looking like it could be a really, valuable treatment. And what I like best about this story is the phage has been given a name by the traditional owners, and that name is the dangerous merry lurker. So I'm giving you the dangerous merry lurker to take with you in the hope that it might help you fend off some infections if you get infected by the superbug Klebsiella.
That's fantastic, because I'm sure we're at risk travelling all over the world.
Well, yes.
But how are you going to give it to us? Is this just a little vial of water? I mean, what are we supposed to do with it?
Well, I did think about that, and I thought this could be tricky. And I was also a bit worried about copyright, because they actually do have photos of the, I guess they've used some microscopic device that takes photographs. So instead of giving you that, I've actually got an illustration of a phage that I can give you, because they all look quite similar. So they tend to have a head-like structure, something that looks like a body, and then these spidery leg-like things. They almost look like a little alien. So I have the image of a phage that I can show you if you like.
That would be great. We'll add it to our collection, and we'll come back to you if we need it.
Do you want me to share my screen to show you, or would you just like me to send it?
Just send us the picture.
I can do that.
Great. Okay. So we're going to leave you now, but where would you like us to go next? Who would you like us to visit? There's actually no promises. We don't always follow it up, but nonetheless, it's a good route.
Well, I tried to pick some people I didn't know in places I didn't know, or places I haven't been to yet. And also that, who sound like they're doing something interesting. Yeah. So the couple of people I found, and I don't have a preference, but they both sound like they're working on very interesting things, is Mrugala Kaumbacher in Berlin. And they're doing work on religion, magic, and practices of the occult, which sounds really kind of fascinating. Or there's Ida Wallen from the University of Freiburg, and she's doing interesting work, it sounds like, on forestry practices.
Great. Well, they're a long way from Melbourne, but we're on a boat, so that's fine. Thank you, Cecily, so much, and we'll see you again next time.
Thanks for visiting. Come back to Melbourne again.
Yeah. We will.
Thank you. Bye.